Hi everyone, and welcome to this second webinar in our Transatlantic Current series, which is a monthly webinar series that features American experts and is organized by the FIA Center on US Politics and Power. Today we'll be talking about the legal battles that may well end up deciding the next president of the United States. And the second part of this webinar is going to be dedicated to your questions. So please do not hesitate to start typing them in as they arise. There is no need to wait for the Q&A to begin before asking a question. But without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor to Leo Michel, who is non-resident senior fellow, at the Atlantic Council, and also a non-resident fellow here at FIA. The floor is yours, Leo.
Kitos, Maria. Hello from Washington, and I'm pleased to moderate the session on legal issues surrounding the US elections. These issues have risen to the forefront of what is now a heated public debate over the fairness of our electoral system, which is a critical pillar of our representative democracy. Let's briefly recall what happened in the November 2000 presidential contest between then Vice President Al Gore and Texas Governor George W. Bush. On election night, the media initially projected Gore would win the popular vote in Florida by a narrow margin, only to switch its projection 6 hours later and declare Bush to be the winner. A Bush victory in Florida would then give him the 271 electoral votes, just enough to win the White House, despite Gore's lead by over 500,000 votes in the national popular vote. So when the Gore campaign demanded vote recounts in 4 Democratic-leaning counties, the Bush campaign, ahead by only several hundred votes out of the 6 million cast in Florida, filed a lawsuit in federal court in Miami to stop the recounts. Ultimately, the lawsuit made its way to the US Supreme Court. And 35 days after the election day, the court ruled by a 5-4 majority that the recounts violated Bush's rights. This, in effect, sealed Bush's victory by only a 537 vote margin out of those 6 million Florida votes. Gore graciously conceded the next day, stating it was necessary, quote, for the sake of our unity as a people and the strength of our democracy. But make no mistake, this was an unprecedented test for the US political and legal system, and there is widespread concern today that we may soon witness a dramatically worse election meltdown when the voting ends on this year's election day, which is November 3rd. Barton Gellman put it this way in his recent article in The Atlantic magazine, I quote, "In this election year of plague and recession and catastrophic politics, the mechanisms of decision are at meaningful risk of breaking down. Close students of election law and procedure are warning that conditions are ripe for a constitutional crisis that would leave the nation without an authoritative result. We have no fail-safe against that calamity." Now, in addition to the presidency, 1/3 of the Senate, now controlled by the Republicans, and the entire House of Representatives, now controlled by the Democrats, will be decided. And in a contested presidential election, both chambers could play a role in determining the outcome. Today's guest, Yuri Rudensky, is a counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice, a nonpartisan law and policy institute with headquarters in New York City. He primarily focuses on reforming the laws and procedures by which politicians use their power to redraw congressional and state legislative boundaries to entrench their own political party, a practice known as gerrymandering. Yuri's expertise also includes legal issues regarding the US population census, mandated by the Constitution to take place every 10 years, and this is a census year. Census results are used to allocate seats in Congress, to draw district lines, and allocate government funding. And this year's census, like the elections, have become a bone of legal and political contention. Beyond his work at the Brennan Center, Yuri is an adjunct professor at New York University School of Law, and he is a graduate of the University of Washington Law School in Seattle, Washington. Welcome, Yuri.
Thank you so much for having me.
To begin, would you please describe for our audience the Brennan Center's mission, its major activities, and how is it funded?
Absolutely. So the Brennan Center for Justice is a nonprofit and nonpartisan think tank, civil rights law firm, policy institute, and communications hub. We work to strengthen and reform and when necessary, defend our systems of democracy and justice. And what that means is we take an approach that looks at institutions and attempts to ensure that our institutions are reflective of the people and are responsive to the people. We approach this work first and foremost by educating the public and trying to win over public opinion on the issues that we work on. We have a large communications team and regularly release things like white paper, analyses, editorials, and other writings. We do public events and have a significant media presence as well. And our belief is if we don't win public opinion, then when we do go to court and when our proposals reach Congress or state legislative chambers, these are the things that we have to do in order to have success. Our program areas cover three major topics. The first is liberty and national security. This program works on things like privacy and the government's deployment of technology, things like facial recognition, risk assessment, algorithms, social media moderation and surveillance. And we also have some folks within that program that work on the rise of white supremacist and neo-fascist nationalism and the links between that movement and law enforcement. We have a justice program which works on reforming the criminal justice system with the goal of reducing mass incarceration, that is, bringing our prison populations down and making sure that our punishments for offenses are more reflective and more proportionate and aren't as socially harmful as they are. And then the program that I am a part of is the democracy program. This is our largest programmatic area, and we have a number of different teams within the democracy program. So first, we have a fair representation team. That's the team that I'm on. And we work on the population census, as you mentioned, and redistricting, which is drawing new electoral districts for both members of Congress and for state legislatures, as well as local governments. We have a voting rights and elections team that works on making sure that all eligible voters have access to the ballot. We have an election security team that works on issues of election administration. Those are things like election infrastructure, making sure that the mechanisms are secure, things like ballot design, really the nuts and bolts of running elections. We have a fair courts team that works on judicial selection on both the federal and state levels and the role of courts and government more generally. We have a money and politics team, which works on limiting the role of large donors and ensuring that elections are funded transparently. And we also have a newer team that's dedicated to studying how the various norms that have been broken, the sort of unwritten rules and functions of government that have been subverted in recent years, how those can be rehabilitated and solutions to make sure that some of the abuses that we've seen aren't able to be repeated in the future. All of these issues, of course, are interconnected, and this year is not just significant because of the election, but because of the census and so because of a Supreme Court vacancy and so many of the other things that are coming to a head.
So let's dive into the election issue then.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt a little bit. Yuri, could you turn your camera on? We're only hearing you, but we're not seeing you at all.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did not realize that. Is that better?
There we are.
Yes, now we're seeing you. Great. Thank you so much. Sorry about
Apologies.
So, as I was saying, let's dive into the election issues. As of today, early in-person voting is already taking place in 16 of the 50 states. And mail-in ballots are being delivered to millions of voters, many of whom presumably have begun to return their mail-in ballots. But even as voting is underway, at my last look, more than 300 election-related lawsuits have been filed in some 45 states by lawyers representing the major political parties and other non-government organizations. So, Yuri, can you describe in general terms what's going on? To use a football analogy, it seems we're playing the World Cup as the umpires are rewriting and possibly rewriting the rules.
Yeah, well, the first thing that I'll say is part of the amount of activity and legal activity around this election is the result of really positive expansion of the vote that we've seen. We have a record number of states that are adopting or permitting voters to cast ballots by mail. Early voting has been expanded, and naturally, there are a lot of issues that are unresolved. So first and foremost, one of the things that's really important to keep in mind about American elections is administration is decentralized. And so each state has its own set of rules and regulations that dictate how the election will be conducted within that state. Some states delegate that authority even further, where counties, which are subdivisions of states, have significant say about how elections are administered. And so when that is the case, and there are disputes around when ballots are counted, how ballots need to be filled out, what counts as a valid ballot, and these are exactly the sorts of issues that are being resolved by the courts right now. For the most part, the big policy questions are now set. There are still some cases that are have gone beyond the initial courts that have heard the matters and are going to courts of appeals. But for it now, it's really just details that are being ironed out. But of course, one of the challenges, given that we're in a pandemic and given the fact that so many different states have adapted to the reality of the present moment, is that there's new systems in place, and what we know about voting is that it's habitual. That is, people tend to vote in the way that they're used to voting. It's like riding a bike, and so when new systems are established, when there are new processes, I think my biggest concern is actually voter confusion and people not being aware of the changes that have taken place, not necessarily the various legal actions that are happening right now.
Mm-hmm. So, if I may ask you, President Trump has repeatedly claimed, without citing any evidence, that mail-in voting in particular is subject to massive fraud intentionally to favor Democratic candidates. From your perspective, is there any historical evidence or credible academic research to support claims of significant fraud, whether through in-person or mail-in voting?
There absolutely is not, and our voting team has researched this extensively, and I think what we found is that you are much more likely, the odds of being struck by lightning are significantly higher than the instance of voter fraud. It is something that has been put into the discourse as a means to confuse people and again, in my view, suppress the vote, make people not have trust in our election systems and election administration. What I will say is a real problem is vote suppression. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people in every that want to vote, that are eligible to vote, who are unable to do so for a variety of reasons. And it's very unfortunate that this completely unsubstantiated issue gets aired and is treated like a legitimate concern, while something that is well documented, that disproportionately impacts racial minorities, that disproportionately impacts lower income communities, is put on par with something that is a fabricated myth, quite frankly.
Thank you. So Barton Gellman and other experts have described some grim scenarios of what might happen when the voting ends on November 3rd. Their analyses differ somewhat, but they have several points in common. And I'm going to take 2 minutes for those in the audience to outline the basic scenario. Point 1, it is possible that many more Democrats and independents might vote this year by mail due to COVID-19 considerations, while relatively more Republicans might favor in-person voting, at least in part because of the president's attacks on mail-in balloting. Point 2, many states will not start counting mail-in ballots until election night. Hence, when initial results are announced on election night, Trump lead based on the early projections might indicate a Trump lead based on the in-person voting in the 9 so-called battleground states. And these include, for example, Pennsylvania, Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Point 3, based on his statements during and since the 2018 midterm elections, Mr. Trump might try to claim victory on the basis of the early vote counts and, with each passing day thereafter, attempt to discredit the counting process for mail-in ballots, something, of course, that he's already trying to do. Point 4, amid heated legal disputes over the vote count and possible civil unrest, one or more of the Republican-controlled legislatures in those battleground states could decide to bypass the popular vote and instead choose their state's electors by themselves, throwing their support, of course, to Mr. Trump. Democrats, of course, would object, file counter lawsuits. Moreover, a few of the battleground states have Democratic governors who might decide to submit their own competing slate of Biden electors to the US Congress. And congressional procedures to settle competing lists of electors are not straightforward and haven't been tested since 1876. So it might ultimately fall to the Supreme Court to render a crucial judgment. And here we note that President Trump and Vice President Pence suggested that the nominee to replace the late Justice Ginsburg on the Supreme Court must be confirmed by the Senate before Election Day, precisely because, as they point out, the court might need to decide on one or more critical election issues. So that is what we are calling the perfect storm scenario in broad strokes. From your legal perspective, how realistic is that or a similar scenario?
So I think there is a lot in that list, and again, these are sort of the worst possible things that someone who is listening to the discourse around the election can come up with. And one of the things that we've been trying to say is so much of what has been aired, particularly by some of the campaigns out there, is more than anything designed to, again, suppress the vote. to make people stay home, to make people feel like their vote won't be counted, to make people feel like their vote does not matter, because results are going to be predetermined or determined by some sort of higher authority in the courts or a state legislature or someone else. And our position on that is that the voters decide, and our systems are strong enough to withstand these sorts of abuses. And the most important thing right now is to get the message out to voters, to make sure that they understand how voting is going to take place this year, that they make a plan, a specific plan to vote on a particular date and to choose a method, and to vote early. The analogy that we've been using is that there's been a lot of talk, of course, about flattening the pandemic curve and slowing the spread of the coronavirus. And we want to flatten the voting curve. I think a lot of the issues that will arise will be because of the level of enthusiasm that we are seeing this year. And the most important thing is that people that there aren't huge spikes in people voting, that there aren't huge all at the same time. That is actually my and our biggest concern, because given the fact that we are still in a pandemic, a lot of, say, the traditional polling sites are either not open or operating on a very limited basis. These are public schools, these are libraries, community centers, senior centers, these other sorts of spaces which are in different times much more open. Poll workers tend to be older individuals, and I think and they are volunteers by and large. And so making sure that there are enough people to be at election sites and help people move through smoothly. These are the things that we are working on right now. These other issues that you've mentioned, again, it's not that they aren't real, because certainly there are prominent public officials that are giving air, but they would be completely unprecedented, and it's not something that we want to lend legitimacy to, because though it's not how our system is supposed to work, and we do think our system is strong enough to overcome those types of challenges.
So before turning to questions from our audience, I'd like to ask you just two more questions. And these pertain really to your specialty at the Brennan Center. Could you describe, please, how gerrymandering works, its effects, especially on minorities, you've mentioned that, and the type of reforms that could reduce or eliminate its effects on representative democracy?
Yeah, thank you. So I will provide an illustrative example. So allow me to share my screen briefly. So the American system of governance for legislative bodies, for the legislative branch, is geographic based. That is, we create geographies that are not naturally occurring, so not cities, not counties. These aren't existing administrative subdivisions of government. These are subdivisions that are created exclusively to elect representatives to go to either Congress, to state legislatures, or to our local governments. And every 10 years after the population census, which occurs in years ending in 0, each state and each governmental subdivision that has a legislative body has to draw new districts. And these districts dictate so much about how our representative system governs. And it's a system that can be manipulated because grouping certain communities together and certain people of certain political persuasions helps produce political results. And that is the process known as gerrymandering. What you have on your screen right now is a map of North Carolina, which is one of the US states, and it's one of the states that has seen some of the most egregious gerrymandering in this election cycle. This map that I'm showing you is the 12 congressional districts. So these are the representatives that go to Congress in Washington, D.C. And this was a map that was found to be unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court. But it was drawn in 2011. And District 12 is the one that I wanted to highlight. It's a snake-like district that goes from, that captures part of the city of Charlotte, which is a major city in North Carolina, and snakes up. And what this district does is it captures a very large portion of North Carolina's Black population. So what the Republican lawmakers that were in charge of redistricting in 2011 did is they said, how do we limit the political influence of Black North Carolinians? And they did that by drawing them into as few districts as possible. That's District 12, which I've highlighted, District 4, and District 13. I'm sorry, District 1. And the goal, of course, is, and North Carolina is a typical swing state. And swing state means that it's very evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. And a lot of that has to do with its sizable Black population. And so by drawing these districts like District 12 that carefully captured all of the and overly concentrated Black residents in a single district, it limited their influence in all the other districts. And what it created is this distribution of districts. So what we did is we analyzed the state and identified at what point does each district, can a Democrat win each district? And one of the things that you see in the light blue was this original plan that was found to be an impermissible racial gerrymander. And it was an impermissible racial gerrymander because it took Black residents and over-concentrated them in 3 districts. And what that means is the Democrats are certain to win it, even if Republicans win roughly 80% of the vote in the state. So an unbelievable number of the Democrats that live in the entire state of North Carolina were concentrated into 3 districts. When the map was redrawn, the North Carolina legislature, which was still controlled by Republicans, said, well, we're not going to racially gerrymander. What we will do is we will use party affiliation as the organizing principle. And so we're going to take all of the Democrats that we can, and we're going to put them into the same 3 districts. And that's the dark blue line there. And so what you see is again, Democrats win 3 districts with very, very low percentages of the vote statewide. And what you see on the other side of the chart are all the districts that were carefully crafted so that Republicans win them just outside of the election range. And so the election range is where the elections in North Carolina traditionally occur. It's as I said before, it's a typical swing state where Democrats win anywhere between 45 and 55% of the vote. Same for Republicans. And while the Democrats get their 3 districts before they even win 30% of the statewide vote, Republican districts are just on the outside edge of the election range, which means that all the other districts seem like that they're competitive races, but really Republicans are winning their districts 56-44, 53-47 in tighter races, but it's so precise, these calculations, because of the advance of analytical tools and so forth, that you can really create these types of outcomes. And the thing that we've seen is, despite shifts in voter preference over the course of 10 years, North Carolina has sent the exact same number of Democrats and Republicans to Congress. And so that is essentially what, and I'll stop sharing my screen now, that is what gerrymandering is all about. It is about predetermining political outcomes, and it has tremendous negative consequences. Voter turnout goes way down. And as I was saying before, these are the most concerning sorts of things. People do not vote when they don't feel like their vote matters. And gerrymandering makes people's votes not matter. And so these are the things that we work on. All of these issues are ultimately interconnected, and so our work around redistricting really starts next year. Every single state in the country will be drawing new districts come 2021.
So my final question, if you could briefly describe the efforts by the Brennan Center, or perhaps others, to ensure a fair census count this year. There's been back and forth between the administration and several non-government organizations about the proper date to stop collecting the census data, because that would have effects that would, in some cases, work to the advantage of one party over the other.
Yeah, so the decennial census traditionally has been a very apolitical institution. There has been broad agreement that it is necessary for the functioning of government to know how many people live in each community, so that resources and federal spending and state spending can be allocated accordingly, and so political representation can be allocated accordingly. The Trump administration has politicized the census, unlike we've seen since before World War II. And census operations were scheduled to run over the course of the year 2020, starting April 1st and ending in December. Of course, at the height of the pandemic, the Census Bureau could not continue its operations. And so statisticians and really technical experts, not political appointees, said the census needs to be extended. It needs to be extended by a number of months so our operations can be run as they should, so we can count everyone. The Trump administration changed that, and they wanted the census to be conducted on the timeline that it was supposed to, which would have numbers produced to the president by December. And so they artificially shortened the timeline. They ordered their career experts to shorten the timeline, and my colleagues challenged that in court, and they recently won a major legal victory where a court found that the administration did not follow the right process to shorten the timeline that the Bureau itself said it needed in order to complete the task that it set out to do. And so the Census Bureau will continue counting and continue operations until at least October 31st. This is a major victory and will ensure that communities will get the resources that they should and the representation that they should.
Thank you. Maria, let me turn it back to you to submit questions now from our audience in Helsinki and elsewhere in Finland. Thank you very much, Yuri.
Thank you, Leo. Yuri, your camera is off again. After you shared your screen, your camera went off again. So if you could please turn it on. All right. Seems we have a question here. So the 2020 presidential election will be the first presidential election since 1980 in which the Republican Party will be legally able to deploy ballot security operations, which in the 80s were suspected of voter intimidation. What is your take on these poll watching missions in the context of this year's election? That's the question from the audience.
Yeah, there are the rules around poll monitoring and poll watching. First, there's a tremendous amount of rhetoric in terms of the presence of, say, federal law enforcement officials, and that is patently unlawful. And the specific rules in terms of poll monitoring depend from state to state, but in most instances, these are folks that need to be registered. There still are significant limits to what can be done. And again, this is being deployed, in our opinion, as a means to intimidate people and to discourage people from going to the polls. It's if people think that there are going to be federal law enforcement or military members there, they may not want to go and stand in a long line. It's designed to intimidate. We will see what happens on election day, but again, we don't want to play into the scare tactics. And again, that's exactly what we think is happening. It's an attempt to scare people from exercising their right to vote.
And if I'm not mistaken, it's an attempt to suppress especially voters of color from using their vote, because the systemic racism makes it more likely that a Black person is scared or intimidated by this presence of police or federal troops than a white person. Isn't that right?
That's exactly right. And again, just to expand a little further, 45 states have limitations on poll watching. And in terms of federal poll watching, the only permissible federal poll watching is by the Department of Justice that is looking for abuses and looking for issues and misadministration of elections. So again, we will be very active on election day. There is an army of attorneys all over the country that are going to be on hotlines, receiving phone calls from people who are at polls that are experiencing, and whether it's voter intimidation or whether it is a different sort of issue with the administration of the election. There are people that are going to be standing by. So it's not to say that there won't be issues, but again, we're confident that the election will go forward, the enthusiasm will be high, and that people will be able to make their voices heard.
And what can you do if someone calls you and says there's these illegal alleged poll watchers that are intimidating voters of color? Do you just make a note and then make a legal case of it afterwards, or what can you do?
Well, and again, this isn't my specific specialty, and what I will say is it depends on the state and the laws of that state. But there is litigation, so lawyers filing court cases on election day, and that's a regular occurrence. It doesn't mean anything is seriously broken, and things like that can get resolved. and we expect the law to be followed. And so if there is someone who is intimidating voters at the poll and it violates that state's laws, we expect that person should be removed and would be removed. And so it's not to say that it won't cause issues, but there are the courts and lawyers are on standby to resolve these types of issues.
Okay, we have some more questions here. There has been great worry in recent years on the functioning of electronic voting machines. Have necessary steps been taken in order to improve the machines?
Yeah, so one of the things that our election security team that works on election infrastructure works on is ensuring that there is a paper record, that ballots aren't tallied exclusively electronically. And I do know that there has been progress made on that front. Again, not being on that team, I can't get too deep into the details there. But a lot of the issues can be resolved by ensuring that there are proper audits and making sure that there is redundancy built in. And I know that a lot of states and a lot of election administrators have taken steps to remedy those issues.
And there's another question about how do the election officials verify that the mail-in votes are really given by the person whose name it's in? Like, how do you verify the voter ID or the signature or whatever it is that is verified?
So again, I think it may depend from state to state. I have lived in Washington State for a long time, and before coming to the Brennan Center, that's where I was working in Seattle. That state conducts all its elections entirely by mail, and the process there is a signature matching process. And it's a good one because for people where election administrators aren't certain, they have an opportunity to fix any that may have arisen. And that is our recommendation, is making sure that when people aren't sure, that they have a chance to track their ballot, see if there's an issue, and fix the issue if necessary. But it's, at least in Washington State, which is what I'm familiar with, it is a signature matching verification process. But again, in terms of voters are registered, they are registered to an address. Those are the addresses that ballots go to. And so there are, it's a very secure and safe way to vote, particularly in a pandemic. And actually the first mail-in voting that occurred in the United States was during the Civil War. And so there's a more than 150-year history of voting being done by mail without issue, and with voter fraud or people casting ballots when they're not supposed to be, or pretending to be someone else, being a non-existent, virtually non-existent issue.
I've personally been worried about voter suppression in the case of mail-in voting. I read somewhere that some states actually allow the election official to see which party the voter is registered to when determining whether the signature matches or not. So it just seems like, if people have their own political views, of course, their personal views, that if someone is working as an election volunteer and they're counting the ballots and they're matching the signatures and they're thinking, oh, this guy voted for the other party, like, I don't like this vote, and then they look at the signature, aren't they more likely to just throw it out? I understand that this is actually something that's been litigated a lot.
This is something that gets litigated. There are sort of, when you look at ballots not counting, it doesn't cut evenly. Certain populations, younger people, people of color, and poor communities experience bigger issues. And that's just a long and ugly legacy of American politics. And it goes back a very long time. And it's the same reason why with in-person voting, certain communities, people have to wait 4 or 5 hours to be able to cast a ballot. While in wealthier white communities, you just go in and come out. And there is, of course, political consequences to that. I think that the mail, there's no reason to think at this point that there will be huge discounts of ballots, and I'm not certain, or at least there's nothing that I know of where there will be sort of a partisan tilt to it in terms of people looking at the ballot, seeing who someone is voting for, and then deciding whether to count or not count the ballot. What I am more worried about is there are specific things with respect to how the election is done, which seems neutral on its face, but is actually calculated to have a disparity. And things like voter ID, for example, seem like a reasonable policy, but we know who doesn't have ID, and it tends to be people of color, it tends to be young people, it tends to be poor people, and so it has a disproportionate impact. And so those are policies that we at the Brennan Center oppose, and those are the types of issues that are going to be more significant issues than rogue election administrators that are trying to use their position to produce certain election outcomes. And so what we're focusing on are the systemic issues and the systemic barriers that very much exist.
From our Finnish perspective, I think a lot of us are wondering, couldn't you just give everybody a free government ID? Like, could everybody just get an ID for free, and then you could require an ID, and then we could just end this talk of IDs or not IDs, and that method of voter suppression would just go away?
It's, again, one of the things about our American system is, again, it's decentralized. And it's not, we don't have centralized election administration. We don't have centralized licensure. Each state issues IDs, and not everyone in the country has a passport. Of course, that would be the national ID, but it's something that you have to pay for and apply for. And yes, of course, I mean, there are so many ways to improve how things are administered, but I actually think in today's environment, the decentralization may be actually a safety feature rather than a liability. Even though if you are designing a system and building it up from the ground up, centralized administration certainly makes a whole lot more sense.
And why do you say that? Why do you think that it might be a good thing in this climate?
Well, because to the extent that there are manipulations, it's not coming from a singular source. That elections administrators they do not answer to the Trump administration. They do not answer to our Attorney General, Bill Barr. And of course, we've seen the Trump administration with institutions like the census, with even the Center for Disease Control, these institutions that have traditionally been more or less apolitical and just a given part of our public life, have been turned and politicized, and so in this sort of environment, it is probably a positive thing that each state can administer its own election. Yeah. And which isn't to say that there aren't abuses and issues happening in states. Certainly states like Texas and Georgia and North Carolina have a long history of abuses, particularly against racial minorities. But it certainly doesn't allow a official who has expressed strong authoritarian tendencies to seize control over these mechanisms for their own ends. And so it is, I think, a safety measure in this sort of environment.
Yeah, I see. So we have one more question here. As long as politicians control the redistricting system, won't you always have gerrymandering? How would you like to reform the system?
So what we promote are independent commissions made up of people who don't have conflicts of interest. So people who aren't politicians or direct relations of politicians, people who don't do regular business with the government or the political parties, basically people who aren't insiders. And these are systems that are proliferating. Arizona was the first state to adopt an independent commission. Then California came, and that has served as the model for a number of other states. And so this time, we're Michigan, Colorado, California, and Arizona will be using fully independent commissions. Some states have turned to bipartisan commissions, so one party can't control the entire process. Other states have come up with creative solutions. And so redistricting reform has been a tremendously popular issue. And it's one of the things that really gives me a lot of hope, because when redistricting reform is on the ballot, and here in the US, when a state is changing its constitution, usually there's a vote on the amendment of the Constitution, and redistricting is often something that requires that sort of constitutional amendment. And one of the things that we see is redistricting reform passes overwhelmingly with 60% of the vote, 65% of the vote. And when we analyze who is voting for it, it cuts across the political spectrum. And so I do think that regardless of political views, there is an overwhelming majority of the people in this country that want fair systems, that want a government that is oriented toward the interests of voters and the people rather than political interests or corporate interests. It's just the problem, of course, is how do you get the political branches to give up control over something that directly benefits them? And so that's been the challenge. And so, unfortunately, I've had a lot more losses than victories over the last couple of years. But it is something that has gained attention. And one of the things that we've seen over the last 4 years is the American people more generally are much more aware of our systems of government. They are thinking about how they operate. They're thinking about these conflicts of interests and these mechanisms that exist that allow our politics to be corrupted. And that, to me, is a very encouraging thing. And if there are silver linings out of the many abuses of this presidential administration, it is that people are thinking about how do we ensure fair systems? How do we ensure systems that are capable of withstanding these sorts of partisan and political manipulations? And redistricting is certainly one of that. And we've seen unprecedented interest and support for this issue. And to me, that's a real bright spot.
To finish this off, I have one quick question myself. It's about the Supreme Court. Would you care to venture a guess or an analysis of how likely it is that the Supreme Court would actually step in if the vote counts drag in and all that? Because some people are saying like they got so burned from the response from the 2000 decision that they would likely not want to step in again, but then others are saying that it's a new court with new justices and who knows what they might do. Do you have like a gut feeling? Or
it's a tough question. I think there are justices on the court that are very sensitive to the need to maintain public buy-in, and they are aware of the mass public sentiment. And while a lot of times in law school, people think of the courts as separate and apart from politics, I tend to think of the court as being aware and responsive to public opinion. And I really hesitate to speculate because I don't know exactly what kind of issues may arise as the election continues. But I tend to think that there are a lot of justices on the court that will not want to be seen as choosing the next president. Maybe that is wishful thinking on my part, and I certainly can't. I don't want to be bound to that. But I think that given the level of voter enthusiasm, turnout is going to be very high. I think the people are going to choose, the Electoral College, of course, will choose, but the people will vote. They'll make their voices heard, and that's how the next president will be selected.
All right, that's a very good note to end on. Thank you so much, everyone. Leo, did you want to say something, or?
No, just to again thank Yuri for doing this, Maria also for hosting, and to thank our Finnish audience. And we will be in touch before long about our post-election webinar on transatlantic currents.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Leo, and thank you, Yuri. And for those of you who missed our first webinar, the first Transatlantic Currents webinar is available for viewing at the FIA YouTube channel, so you can check it out there. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.